Oroiti in the 1950s was fairly much as it is now, a patchwork of farms and a main road, a stream leading to the sea, and a school. It was here that Elwyn Richardson came in 1949 and discovered in himself an extraordinary teacher. The experiment he began in this tiny northern playground saw the flowering of a community of youthful artists and scientists, and was to earn the young teacher admiration from educators in New Zealand and abroad, but the enmity of the authorities. Elwyn Richardson retired to this West Auckland farm in 1988, returning to the lifestyle that had first attracted him to Oroiti 30 years before. It had been an act born of disillusionment.
The system was such that I went there to get away from it. It was a prescriptive society. Every subject of the curriculum was written down quite clearly. For instance, you discussed the sparrow in Standard 2. There were tables for phys ed, and every subject was dictated to the teacher. My natural inclination was to see this as a failure-prone structure. And I went there to get away from those sort of systems, but I also went there to study malacology, mollusca, in the far north. In other words, to engage in my own creative endeavours. But I very soon got interested in children.
The children at Oroiti were Māori and Brethren Pākehā, the sons and daughters of struggling farmers whose entire world was the valley.
The only thing they ever knew was the bus and the trucks that went by. A good third of my class didn't even know what a train was, John. They hadn't seen Okaiha, which wasn't really more than 40 or 50 miles away. And it was the Brethren, the Plymouth Brethren children, who were largely Pākehā, white people. They were the ones that had been to Whangarei to church service, and that was about all. The Maori children, on the other hand, tended to live in a very insular sort of a way. They lived at their beach, they lived at their cottage or their house, wherever it was, and they lived towards the sea, as I felt. And the adventure of their life was to go into Monganui, which was 7 or 8 miles away.
For these children, indeed for any children, Richardson discovered that the textbook and the lesson plan were inappropriate.
I saw this as being completely unreal as far as the children were concerned. It did not involve them in their real needs, and I felt that education had to be real. It had to be about their felt experience. And later on, when I came to read Wordsworth, I recalled his words of saying that virtually all kinds of creativity arise from emotion recollected in tranquility. And I aimed intuitively and very strongly towards those ends. So I felt my children were needing to express themselves about their own lives, about their own homes, their own muddy tracks that led through the hills, their own fishing spots and things of that order. And I think that was the whole strength of the thing from the very beginning. I was lucky that I had that instinct, that I had that drive to push the children into that area. They went very willingly. They left the textbook on page 69 in English and very readily wrote and talked and acted about their own lives and jumped to page 170 in 10 minutes. They did that remarkably.
It was with clay that Elwyn first established the style of learning that was to distinguish Oroiti. Over some weeks, the children had enthusiastically gathered and tested clays, settling eventually on the best mix. Elwyn, a potter himself, offered advice, and each child's discovery about the material or a technique was shared, adopted, and modified. A creative pattern was established, and a community of learning.
The boys were busy making bulls, and they made lots of bulls. I remember going to school one day, no one was there. They were all down the paddock looking at a new big bull that somebody had brought in. And for some months, they made scores and scores of bulls.
A new kind of talk emerged with the clay work, an active discussion of values, as children discovered they could express opinions about form and decoration. There was, too, a new style of discipline, responsibility to materials and people, growing from the group rather than being imposed from above.
I love the delight of the accuracy of this lass's brush strokes. It shows great dexterity, great quality. And this is a lovely one, a head made by Sonny, who again was a very gifted potter. I love the economy of the way in which he collects up the clay. It shows you a little bit about the essence of craft and the discipline of it. They put smudge fires in these lovely pots, and smoke would come out the eyes and the ears, and they'd dance around them with glee. Ah, the tall pot has reached its peak. A sort of a scratch design, hardly a refito because it's painted, but a strong sort of symbolic leaf or tree structure joins the pot. These are large fish pots. They call them that because they were decorated with fish. I still own one of those. They gave it to me as a farewell gift, I remember.
A kiln was built using bricks brought by the children.
We used waste oil. It was the only way we could get our energy cheaply. In 13 hours or so, we would reach about 1,300 degrees on the top of the kiln. Some of the animals are appearing out of the kiln. I see a bull there, and there's the boy that made the nice rhinoceros. Glenys looks at her cow and her calf. Lovely little thing, little treasure. These big fat-bellied pots and these big fish pots are now saturated with glaze, as elegant as they'll ever be. Some of these coiled feature pots, they called them, pots that looked a bit like people, waiting for their smudge fires, for the smoke to pour out of their eyes and mouths. This lovely big fatuous bum-like pot. These large pots were made of a very large amount of clay, required a lot of work just to produce them. The interest in drums and interest in music was strong with the children, and they, whenever these pots appeared, they were treated like drums. We look now at a series of primer paintings and clay, as I often used to call them, of wasps and hornets and birds and a crocodile.
The local environment became the textbook, and the flora and fauna subjects for study. There were stations to be visited regularly to observe what was happening in the natural world. The aspen and the gum tree, the native bush and the river.
This was one investigation of some stones that we had marked, and we used to look at these stones, and there we see the jelly-like eggs of a snail that lived in the river, Melanopsis. They were very fortunate to have the richness of this river about them, and they used it for swimming, as you see. And I used to swim with them once until I saw the length and the size of the eels that floated by. But they never bit anyone. The tide came up and lapped the willow's feet. The stream was clear, the bottom stony. Once a year we had a fishing day when we lived around by the river, and we attempted to catch eels, most of which were taken home by the Maori children and eaten. But our object was to see whether spring had arrived and who would catch the first sea fish, who would catch the first sprat, sometimes a kahawai, sometimes even a small snapper would come right up the river many, many miles from the sea.
The children studied, drew, wrote and based drama and artwork on the things they found round the school.
Last night I caught the biggest eel. It has blue eyes and a white belly, just like a pakia.
Shells mimicking the sea, a storm battering the trees.
Shell shapes curled round and round Lying scattered about by dead winds are the chishing noises of dry gum leaves. I heard the crabs tapping on the rocks.
Tapping. Birds fly fast, turning their beaks to the morning star.
These creative outpourings were the products of a very different style of teaching.
The education was one of the total society, it was one of the total community. The events of life in that society were what the children learnt about. We felt that we had to learn about things which were outside our society as well. Sometimes these themes or the ideas came to us from people that lived within our society. On other occasions they came from children's needs and desires to learn about other places and other times. The important thing about the whole business was it was always felt, it was always real, it was always about how you responded to all of those kinds of things that were being fed into your learning. My responsibilities were to make sure that it was done with precision and with exactitude, and that there was a real quality of learning. It wasn't only, as Dewey calls it, the song of a bird. The song of the bird was related to the quality of the song of the bird.
Elwyn never withdrew from his role as teacher. Every morning he gathered the children together to discuss the day's program. There were those he needed to work with, and those who, for a morning or a day, would work independently on a dance or drama performance, or a project in the fields. There was always some kind of mathematical activity going on, and everyone wrote every day, feeding material into the school newspaper.
There were days when I would go home absolutely, utterly exhilarated, and yet there were days which were wretched. There were days of moodiness and days when which were not productive. Then there were days when wonderful things were said. I remember a child talking about the telephone singing like Pakihas in church, little Maori boy. A wonderful saying, absolutely glorious. And I would say, well, this has never ever happened before. There's never been this quality of metaphor before. And then another day would come when the child would say, the wet backs of cows roaming in the Raupo swamp. What a marvellous image! What a glorious image! These things were for me the food of existence. They portrayed for me the whole worth of what a creative experience is about. Because while I think that I wasn't teaching individuals to be poets, I was teaching people to be people and to feel a richness in themselves and a belief in themselves. And I found that what I was doing was really teaching people to learn about themselves. And that, I think, is all that education is all about.
This was not, however, the view of the education establishment.
The inspectorate made life very, very difficult for me. I got severe criticism. I was threatened by the local inspector that if I didn't do as I was told, I could be suspended. I was told that I should not be teaching the starling in Standard 2. It should be the sparrow. After all, he said, the sparrow eats the snail, which is also part of the curriculum in Standard 2, but you're not even studying the snail. You're studying the native snail, pupurangi and pupuharakiki, and you shouldn't be doing that. These people always made criticisms of me. They would take out their little brown books and write in their books all the sorts of things that I was doing, all those things that I had done, all those things that I'd left undone, and there was no helping us. They portrayed for me feelings of hate. They made me feel uncomfortable, worthless. They made me feel unhappy, unresolved about what I was doing, until I went home and had a bloody good beer. And then I felt better. I realized that it was all horse shit and that I had to stand up straight by myself. There was no one on whom I could lean. That was tough.
Richardson eventually found allies within the department, people who recognized the importance of the Oroiti experience persuaded the Director General to intervene and sanction this deviation from accepted practice. For 12 years the experiment flourished, and when he left, Elwyn took with him the knowledge of what was possible. His writings, In the Early World, became a source book for creative education. From this printing shop in the Henderson Valley, Elwyn still produces a steady stream of ideas about what our schools should be doing. He reminds us that learning is most effective when it is made personal and emotional.